Well, you were listening to Meeting House here on Faith Radio, and it is great to welcome to the program Laura Gallier. She is someone who has really some keen insight into what young people are facing today. She is the lead developer of a character building program. It's called I Am Worthy, Mental Emotional Wellness and Character Building Program for students in public schools. Also, she is the author of the Christie Award-winning novel series called The Delusion, which actually offers a spiritual perspective to some of these issues that young people are facing. And Laura, you actually have written 3 different books in the Delusion series, and now those 3 are combined as a 3-book set and are due out next week. So I know that you're excited about having all of those in one place. So thank you for spending some time with us today here on the Meeting House on Faith Radio.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Let's talk first of all about the purpose of this particular book. And before we do that, I'd like to just ask you, as far as your inspiration, I understand this is born of your own experience, and you really wanted to relate that to today's young people. So tell me just a bit about your own background and how that's really kind of played into what you're doing with this series.
Absolutely. Well, I had an experience at a friend's house in elementary school where the mom shared the gospel with me. It was such a neat, meaningful moment, accepting Christ. But then I went back into my home with a single mom who did not practice faith in the home. And so you could say I had a heart for God, but a head full of the world. So I was discipled by the media and had a very worldly mind, which led to early sexual activity and all kinds of just traps and pitfalls. And I personally had no clue that I had a spiritual enemy who exploits my pain, my hurt, my rebellion. And I played right into his hands until I had a defining moment after an unplanned pregnancy, a rushed marriage, and a very sad and quick divorce. There I was, a single mom, just like I had grown up with a single mom with no father in my life, and had this revelation that God's commandments are for my protection. But again, that means that we understand there's an enemy. There is evil out there. And so the goal in writing the Delusion series is not to villainize mental emotional health by any means. There is a spirit, soul, body side. There's physical implications to mental illness, there's mind and belief system, and then there is a demonic side. So used the topic of suicide to illustrate how that demonic world wants to pounce on our pain and rebellion. And in a package of entertainment, the story is told in really fast-paced fiction to grab people who are not necessarily going to pick up a Bible or walk in church, but they still completely relevant to their life and interesting to them.
Well, I think that's outstanding that you've actually taken, and we hear so much about mental health these days, especially among our young people, and there are statistics with respect to suicide. There's great concern about that in society. I'd like for you to elaborate on something you said when you look at the spiritual dynamics. Obviously, there are mental and emotional implications, but we recognize that there is an enemy. His ambition, as Jesus said, is to steal, kill, and destroy. So what do you see? Obviously, when you have a child that does not have a relationship with Jesus Christ, that young person is certainly vulnerable to all sorts of spiritual components. But it also, when you have young people who are even professing Christians, they find themselves under spiritual attack. Share with us how you see, or elaborate just a bit more on how that works with respect to the spiritual component that's manifested in the mental and emotional realm.
Yes, well, I've experienced this personally, walked through a very dark valley as an adult when childhood trauma surfaced in a single moment and just was like this tsunami of pain. So I've walked this out experientially, and I want to start by saying we have to be so careful that no one misunderstands that the church is not saying, hey, we'll just have this trite prayer and rebuke mental illness and depression, or to be trite about that is so insensitive. And for me, it was a 4-year journey to even start to feel normal again. That said, one of the most commonly overlooked contributing factors in any mental health issue, whether it's as extreme as like chronic OCD or just these troubling thoughts that are tormenting, is the root of fear. The root of fear. And fear is a very spiritual concept. There's even such thing as a spirit of fear. And certainly that satanic demonic kingdom wants to exploit fears. So there is understanding how that works, and that there's quite literally a fight for us to believe lies about ourselves and our self-worth, which is just hugely, hugely under attack. I'm not saying it hasn't always been from the beginning of time, but today's young people, with factors like the breakdown of the family being so rampant, with these influences online that are not telling the truth, that are misleading, they are suffering in their self-worth. And where there's a void of identity, the enemy wants to come in and tell us how rotten we are and shame us and bring false guilt. And so it becomes so empowering, not scary or discouraging, but empowering when we realize there's a God who loves me. There's a God who not only cares about my eternal destination, but my daily moment by moment experience. The Word of God says He delights in the details of our lives. He cares about our emotions, our experiences, our traumas. And so to get to meet young people and adults through the book series, The Delusion, in that place and give hope and light while also, again, exposing the enemy's playbook is how I like to say it.
Laura Gallier is joining us today here on the Meeting House on Faith Radio, the author of the 3-book series called The Delusion. And as you began to write this particular book, what are some of the concepts that you really wanted to communicate through? Of course, the first book was written back in 2017. That was called The Delusion. Then you had The Deception in 2019, The Defiance in 2020. So now it's a 3-book set. Next week it will be released. So what did you want to communicate through this device of fiction to young people?
Yes, such a great question. You know, there's things we just take for granted. For example, you know, unforgiveness. It seems like a lot of us have someone that we would say, oh, I hate that person, or I can't forgive that person. Or we have different, you know, literal pain, trauma, abuses that creates that. And I wanted to show and illustrate that that becomes a literal tool in the enemy's hand to torment us. And then also meet people there compassionately. And not, again, just, you know, tritely say, hey, forgive, just let go of what that hurtful thing that person did to you. I wanted through the protagonist's journey for people to see what the process of healing looks like and growing in our faith, and that it's okay to have skepticism toward God and questions. As a matter of fact, I think it's dangerous if we don't approach with some questions and ask the hard questions. And so to clarify, the protagonist in The Delusion is a high school senior named Owen Edmonds, whose high school is plagued by a suicide epidemic, and he is cynical. He has a hard life, alcoholic parent, fatherless, and he just wants to graduate and get out of there. And then through his own near-death experience, he begins to see these evil forces that are preying on his classmates. He also sees these angelic beings, but he has zero biblical vernacular, so he's just trying to figure it out as he goes. And so, of course, he's weighing with these hard questions. Why don't angels show up and save the day every time? Why do some parents leave? How am I supposed to love God the Father when He allows these things to happen? These are real-world questions that the protagonist wrestles with.
And so how do you illustrate that in the book, the wrestling? Is it through conversation, internal conversation, relationships with others, or all of the above?
Yeah, it is all of the above. And there are some tangible, they're really cinematic, which is why we're working on the feature film. There are some tangible symbols we use, like a shackle to represent the condemnation of sin and needing to be set free. There's chains. And as you read, spoiler alert, we find out that those have to do with unforgiveness. There's these cords that come out of people's heads. I know it sounds grotesque, but it's meant to. And those represent these, sin habits and what we would call iniquities in our lives. And you watch how the demons literally use those as tools. So it's not that we blame everything on the devil. We just start to realize how we are putting tools in his hands through our own ignorance, rebellion, and just not understanding how to be free, with the goal being that we get a very clear picture, literally even visually and mentally, of how to be free.
You're listening to The Meeting House here on Faith Radio. Laura Gallier joining us today, author of the Christie Award-winning novel series, The Delusion, the 3-book set, coming out next Tuesday, the 20th. So we talked just a bit about the work of the enemy. In fact, there's some data that actually shows that there's a enhanced interest in the occult and witchcraft among young people today. How pronounced is that as you see it?
Well, through my own interactions with that middle school culture, I have a son who is still in middle school. It is very common for them to have crystals, cast spells. They follow witches on social media. It's become trendy and acceptable. And you really see that demonic bait and switch where you have young people who are feeling insecure, wanting to fit in, all these things that are actually very innocent desires. And they're told, hey, this spell can cause people to like you. This crystal can make you beautiful and likable. And so it really appeals to these heart needs that we have as human beings. So it's so important to lovingly, without pointing a condemning, judgmental finger, just lovingly meet young people where they're at and show them that as fascinating as the paranormal world can be, there is a dark side to it. I just got a message yesterday through Facebook from a young man who said, I filmed horror movies just thinking it was cool, had no idea the demonic baggage that would enter my life. I'm still recovering from how detrimental it was. And he was just thanking me for warning about these things. So that's the goal, is to meet this generation where they're at with their genuine heart needs and show them there's a better way that's not an evil bait and switch that's actually going to harm them instead of help them.
An evil bait and switch. That's very a very good statement there. And we, obviously Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. And it sounds like to me that you really get into some of the ways that the enemy operates. And sometimes that can be an uncomfortable subject for Christians to discuss when we think about matters of spiritual warfare. So how do you see some of the principal ways that the enemy actually operates today?
Yes. Well, he knows our pain and hurt and fears, and he pretends to give us protection from those things. For example, in witchcraft, it's all about controlling outcomes, and that can bring a false sense of security that, if I abide in these teachings and philosophies, this thing that I fear will never happen, when all the while he's setting you up for that fear to happen. It's very cruel. And so again, whereas witchcraft promises empowerment, the real empowerment comes when we know the love of God, when we have the wisdom of God, and when we don't fall for his tactics, which again center around the heart. His ways will always lead us away from God and into self-reliance and things that appear right, but in the end lead to destruction.
Well, we know that the enemy has a strategy, and the Apostle Paul writes, we are not ignorant of his schemes. But we also recognize that the Bible presents us with a strategy by which we can walk in victory. So how would you describe perhaps some of the elements of that victorious strategy? In other words, how is it that we ourselves personally, as well as our young people, can actually implement strategies and resources by which they can defeat the power of the enemy?
Yeah, so the first thing is to make a distinction between dead religion and what it truly means to be a born-again Christian. Religion is when we have a head full of rules and doctrines, but our heart is not full of love. And I got to be honest, they're my biggest critics. It's that religious spirit. They never want you to do any teachings on the demonic realm because that is a very demonic state of being to begin with. So when young people understand, and adults, that we serve a God who loves us, who meets us where we're at, he's so far beyond the four walls of the church. And to the point I already made, yes, he has standards and commandments, but they're for our protection. They're never about limiting our freedom or fun. As a matter of fact, it's all about being free. So helping young people see God in the right light and know that he wants a meaningful relationship with us. The Bible says that his love casts out fear. He wants to meet us in our everyday circumstances and fears and show us his way, his assurances, his forms of protection, which does require surrender and obedience. But what a joy, what an honor to be able to serve and follow him and learn his ways and do things his way. It makes for an incredibly, not always perfect life by any means, but a meaningful, rich life in terms of the quality.
Well said. Laura Gallier joining us today here on the Meeting House on Faith Radio. And Laura, if people want to find out more information about you and the Delusion series and just generally the work that you do, how can they connect with you online?
Yeah, great question. My website is lauragallier.com, LauraGallier.com. I answer my own contact page, so that's easy. And then the Delusion is right there on Amazon, and you will see that new 3-pack bundle. You can pre-order it. It'll come right to your home in the next few days when it's ready. And also on social media and putting videos and just life-giving content out there.
That's great. Laura, thank you so much for spending some time with us today here on the Meeting House on Faith Radio.
Thank you. I appreciate you.